I made a mistake the night before my wedding, and I spent the next 15 years pretending it never happened. I'm telling this story for the first time, aside from one conversation a few months ago, after 15 years of carrying it completely alone. I'll call the man I married Mark, because his real name doesn't matter for what I need to say. When we got married, everyone around us thought we had one of those rock-solid marriages, the kind other couples measure themselves against. Nobody knew what actually happened the night before the wedding, in a hotel room while my maid of honor was celebrating my bachelorette party with the rest of my friends, one floor down from where I was. Before Mark, there was Daniel. We were together for several years, going all the way back to college. At the time, that relationship felt enormous, the kind that makes you believe you'll never be able to love anyone else quite that way again. We didn't break up because the feelings faded or because something went wrong between us. We broke up because we wanted different things out of life, or at least that's the story we told each other and mostly believed. He got a job offer in another city, and I didn't want to leave the life I'd built where I was. Instead of fighting for something that might not have survived the distance anyway, we let it end quietly, more like something running out of air than something breaking apart. I met Mark about a year later, through mutual friends at a dinner neither of us had really wanted to go to. He was the complete opposite of Daniel in almost every way, dependable, steady, the kind of person who remembers small details about your life and never once shows up late. I fell for exactly that steadiness, and I told myself, and everyone who asked, that this was what real love was supposed to feel like, calm instead of chaotic, certain instead of constantly uncertain. We dated for 2 years before he proposed, and when he did, I said yes without a single moment of hesitation, because on paper, and in most of the ways that mattered, he was exactly what I'd been looking for my whole adult life. What I didn't account for, and what I don't think I fully admitted to myself until much later, was that Daniel never completely left my mind. Even while I was falling for Mark, even while I was choosing wedding flowers and a venue with someone else, there were moments, usually late at night, when I found myself wondering what would have happened if either of us had just been a little more willing to compromise back then. I told myself that was normal, that everyone thinks about an old relationship from time to time, and that thinking about someone isn't the same thing as still being in love with them. A few weeks before the wedding, Daniel reached out for the first time in years. He'd heard through a mutual friend that I was getting married, and he sent a message that was short and polite, congratulating me, saying he hoped I was happy. I wrote back, because ignoring it felt unnecessarily cold, and that one reply turned into a steady back and forth over the following weeks. He told me about his job, about a relationship that had ended about a year before, about how he'd recently moved back to the city where we'd both grown up. I told myself the whole thing was harmless, that reconnecting with someone from your past right before a wedding wasn't something to feel guilty about. But the messages kept coming, and they got longer, and eventually more personal than casual catching up usually is. Somewhere in the middle of those weeks, I noticed I was checking my phone for his replies more often than I wanted to admit, even to myself. I never mentioned any of it to Mark. Not because I was hiding a full affair, not yet at that point, but because some quiet part of me understood that if I said it out loud, it would sound like exactly what it was slowly becoming. Just a few days before the wedding, Daniel asked if we could meet in person, one last time, just as friends, before I got married and everything between us changed for good. I convinced myself that seeing him once more would give me the kind of clean closure I never really got the first time we ended things. I didn't tell Mark, because staying quiet felt so much easier than trying to explain something I didn't fully understand myself. We agreed to meet at a small bar on the other side of town, somewhere neither of us was likely to run into anyone we knew. I told my mother I was going to get my nails done, which happened to be true earlier that same day, so the lie sat comfortably next to the truth. I told my maid of honor I just needed one quiet evening to myself before the whole wedding weekend took over. When I saw Daniel walk through the door, something tightened in my chest in a way it hadn't in years, and I understood immediately that this wasn't going to be the clean, closure-shaped conversation I'd promised myself it would be. We ended up talking for a long time about everything and nothing, circling the one real thing neither of us was saying out loud. At some point, he reached across the table and asked, straight out, whether I ever thought about what might have happened if we hadn't broken up all those years ago. I should have ended the conversation right there. Instead, I told him the truth, that yes, I thought about it more often than I wanted to admit, even to myself. He was quiet for a moment, and then he asked if I wanted to go back to his hotel, just to keep talking somewhere quieter, away from the noise of the bar. I want to be honest about what happened next, because I think the honesty matters. I wasn't drunk enough to blame it on alcohol, and I wasn't confused about what was happening between us. I knew exactly what I was doing the moment I stepped into the elevator beside him, and some part of me, the part I'm still ashamed of even now, wanted exactly this. Wanted to feel it one more time, before I closed that door permanently the next day. We spent that night together, in a hotel room while my friends were celebrating one floor below, only a matter of hours before I was supposed to walk down the aisle. I didn't cry afterward, and I didn't feel the panic I expected to feel. What I felt instead was a strange, quiet stillness, like something had finally been let out that needed to leave before I could move forward with the rest of my life. I told myself that this was the closure I needed, the only way to fully release Daniel so I could give Mark everything I had left to give him. I left before the sun came up, drove home, slept for maybe 3 hours, and then woke up to start getting ready for my own wedding, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened the night before at all. I married Mark that same day. I smiled through the entire ceremony and meant every single word of my vows completely, even while knowing exactly what I'd done just hours earlier. I truly, genuinely loved Mark, and marrying him wasn't a lie in the way someone hearing this might assume. What happened with Daniel had nothing to do with choosing him over Mark in any real sense. It was something separate, something selfish, a door I needed to close on my own terms before I could fully walk through the one I was actually choosing. That isn't an excuse, and it never has been. But it's the honest truth of how it felt to me at the time. For the first several years of our marriage, I kept what happened locked away in a part of my mind I simply refused to visit. We were busy building a life together, we bought an apartment, and then our first daughter came along, and a couple of years after that, our second. The busier and fuller my life became, the easier it got to convince myself that whatever happened that one night belonged to some other, long-gone version of me, not the woman raising 2 kids and building a real home. But guilt doesn't stay buried forever, no matter how deep you think you put it. It kept resurfacing at the strangest, most unexpected moments. On Mark's birthday, during our anniversary dinner, once during our older daughter's baptism, when the priest said something about honesty and lifelong commitment, and I had to fight back tears that had absolutely nothing to do with the ceremony happening in front of us. Mark would quietly ask if I was okay, and I'd tell him I was just feeling emotional, which was technically true, just never for the reason he assumed. Daniel and I never spoke again after that night, not once. Over the years, I learned through mutual friends that he eventually got married too, had children of his own, and moved even further away from where we'd grown up. Every single time his name came up in conversation, something sharp twisted in my chest, and I pushed it back down again, the same way I'd been pushing it down for years by then. The guilt only grew heavier, never lighter, as our marriage grew stronger and more solid with time, which is a strange thing to try to explain to anyone who hasn't lived through something similar. The happier we became together, the more that single night felt like a stain on something that had genuinely turned into a beautiful life. I started to feel like I was living inside a marriage I didn't fully deserve, like Mark had built his entire world on a foundation with one hidden crack running through it, a crack only I could see, every single day. Not long ago, Mark's father passed away after a short illness. At the funeral, his father's closest friend stood up and gave a eulogy about loyalty, about how the foundation of a marriage that lasted decades had been complete honesty, even in the moments when honesty cost something real. I watched Mark cry quietly during that eulogy, watched him hold both our daughters' hands tightly, and something inside me finally cracked open, for the first time in 15 years of carrying this alone. I didn't tell him that day, or even in the days right after. I spent weeks going back and forth in my head, terrified that telling him the truth would destroy the family we had spent years building together, but just as terrified that staying silent meant carrying the secret with me straight into old age. Eventually, the weight of it became something I simply couldn't manage alone anymore. On an otherwise ordinary evening, after our daughters had finally fallen asleep, I sat down across from Mark at our kitchen table and told him I needed to talk to him about something that happened before we got married. I told him everything, every message with Daniel, the meeting at the bar, the hotel room, all of it, without softening a single part of it, because I felt like he deserved the complete truth after 15 years of only knowing half of me. He sat completely still while I spoke, and when I finally finished, he didn't say anything for what felt like a very long time. Then he asked me one quiet question. He wanted to know if I regretted marrying him. I told him no, immediately and without hesitation, that marrying him had been the best decision of my entire life, and that the guilt I'd carried for 15 years existed precisely because I loved our life together so completely, even though I'd built it on a foundation that hadn't been fully honest from the very first day. He sat with that answer for a long moment, and then he said he needed time, more time than either of us could reasonably predict right now, and that he couldn't promise me what our marriage would look like on the other side of this conversation. He moved into the guest room that same week, and we started seeing a therapist together twice a week. For that entire first month, most evenings ended in silence instead of conversation, and some nights I genuinely wondered if we'd survive it. But slowly, something started to shift between us. Not long ago, I came home from work and found him standing in the kitchen, cooking dinner for all four of us for the first time since I'd told him everything, something he used to do regularly before any of this happened. He didn't say a word about what it meant, and I didn't ask him to explain it. A few nights ago, he quietly moved his things back into our bedroom, without any announcement, exactly the same quiet way he'd carried them out months earlier. I found him already lying in bed when I came upstairs, and for a moment I just stood in the doorway, not entirely sure what to do with my own hands. Then he pulled back the blanket on my side of the bed, the same way he'd done every single night for 15 years before any of this happened, and said, "Are you coming to bed, or are you going to stand there all night?" I got in beside him, and neither of us said another word about any of it. That silence felt completely different from every other silence we'd sat through in the past few months. It felt like something quietly settling back into the place it belonged. Not perfectly, and not exactly the way it used to be, but settling all the same.